Hey Omar, great progress so far. I think today is a great day to show you a technique that you can use to further enhance your blocking stage. And I think it's especially a good method because it's almost a step-by-step guide on how to proceed once you have blocked a shape and how to continue detailing it. So the method that I'm using here is kind of based on Marco Plouffe from Chaos Masons. They're just little things that I do differently to him. But overall, I got this method from him. So I'll be using this chess piece right here. And what I'm going to do now is taking a bright color that's quite different to the blue we've got, and I will sketch in the outer border of the mesh to later split up the front part of this chess piece. So the reason I'm using the paintbrush here is because visually I get more feedback than using the masking brush, and I also don't have to hold down control all the time. It's just easy in handling, and later we can use polygroups by polypaint to split off this portion. So you don't have to be too accurate here because we're going to manipulate the mesh anyway. But now we can use groups from polypaint and then isolate that from part, use auto groups, and then split off this part and hide the rest. So polish by feature is just your best friend in this scenario. You always want your borders clean in order for zero measure to work, otherwise you will always get very messy geometry. So I'm using zero measure with half to get something that's just a little bit less dense. And then I can use polish by feature again, just to loosen up the mesh, make it more relaxed, and polish up the surfaces. And now I use the move brush to move everything in place. And I will often use the gizmo and place it on the surface and move my camera perpendicular to the gizmo, so then I can use the move brush and move the mesh alongside its normals. So now that we have split off the front piece, what we want to do now is establish the secondary and tertiary shapes on top of this primary shape. And what I would like to do is establish more plane changes into the secondary shape to make it more interesting, and those plane changes will also suggest the secondary shapes within this primary shape. So for that I'm going to use the MAH cut brush just to sketch in loosely where I want the edges to be. And then what Marco Plouffe does is he takes the slice curve and moves along these edges and establishes his polygroups for each secondary shape, or where he wants his edges to be in the end. So I just turned off the lines, so I have a better overview of the polygroups. Then again, using the move brush to move everything in place. So let's use seam remeasure again. I just turned down the smoothing because I think it's already smooth enough. And I'm switching to a more glossy material to have a better feedback of what these surfaces look like and how light would react to the surface. And now I really want to give more emphasis on the plane changes, so I'll strengthen up the edges a little bit more. And when you hold down Control with the gizmo activated and click on a surface, it will isolate that surface, masking all the other polygroups, which can be very handy. So now I will use that to my advantage and kind of move out those different planes and use edge polish, in this case with Alt press down, to fill up this concave shape. And so now it's really nice to have these different polygroups for each plane. You can use the edge polish with Alt press down or not, and you can kind of push the shapes towards and away from you until you have the result you want. Really trying to, again, have a look at the mesh from different perspectives, so I get a good sense of how it's shaped and the way the planes are interacting with each other. And I really want the planes to be, quite different from each other, have quite a significant plane change. That way, later on, it will just read way nicer, and when you're gonna render it, the piece, you will see that how the light reacts to the different surfaces. It will look way nicer if you have clear separation of planes. So that's why I used here the clip brush to clip down the surface, and then use again the edge polish to clean that up. And with this stage, you should really take your time because this will be the base of your final mesh. And obviously you can go back at any time, redo all these steps, but if you do it right, then it's a good thing to take your time at this point. Make it look nice. If the base shape is good, the rest will fall in place. If the base shape does not look good, no secondary shapes and details will make it look good. So this step is more important than the rest, definitely. Again, using Move Brush with AccuCurve to pull out these corners. And now what I'm going to do is I will use Mask Lasso to only mask those corners which don't have a polygroup in between them, so to say. And then when you use Polish by Feature, those corners will maintain. So I'm still gonna refine the borders, trying to make the silhouette a bit more interesting. And now I'm trying to move everything into place again. So I'm still pushing and pulling the shape to give more volume to this chest piece, moving everything into place. And I hope you can see the difference now, the way the light reflects on the surface and how nicely the edges now catch the light. I think maybe we can make this portion a bit more interesting, so I'm just deleting these few poly faces here. I think this method of refining your shapes is really nice because it gives you a lot of control working with only a one-sided mesh. Yeah, it's way easier to fuck it up. It's very straightforward. You only have your singular planes without having to worry about the backside that you can mess up at any time. So really just try to get your planes right, have a nice curvature to it, and have a nice silhouette. And once that's done, you can move over to the next stage, right? Again, using the clip brush to make this curvature a bit nicer. So I'm personally not that used to that workflow because I mostly do concept work in Zbrush and stuff never has to be that clean. Sometimes I do high poly work, but this workflow especially is amazing for baking and 3D printing and stuff like that. So since you want to do baking and use it later on in Unreal Engine, I think this is an amazing workflow to get the highest quality out of the mesh. So what I'm trying to do here now is to isolate the different poly borders. So when I use polish by feature, I won't destroy the rest, but I'm not having great results here. So I'm redoing that. But overall, I think this is doing the trick. Just doing small polish by feature again. And once you get used to this workflow, I think it will be faster and faster with each time. So let's do another quick save just before moving to the next stage. So now I'm using dynamic thickness. And what you should look out for is try to give an offset that is positive. Because if you are using a negative offset, you will get these kind of overlappings. So try to use the positive offset. That way you get clean geometry. And now we can reduce the thickness to our liking. I think that looks fine. And hit apply. So again, with a fairly large brush size, we can move everything into place without destroying the inner forms, just the overall curvature and scale. So what I like to do now is make a duplicate and now use parts of the duplicated mesh for later use. So the parts that I'm going to use is first of all the strip that gives the thickness to the mesh that we can later use for framing. So I'm going to split up that part. And then the other part we can use is the backside of the original mesh. So I'm just going to grab a little piece here, Ctrl-Shift-A to bring everything back. And now with dynamic thickness, we can give a backside to this shell basically. Can give it a different color as well. And that way it will give a very nice separation. So these are just all ideas that you can use or not. I just think it's better to know all the possibilities. But obviously you don't have to make it that complicated, right? So now that we can use crease polygroups, and that will assure that when we subdivide the mesh, the borders and edges will stay nice and sharp. And to adjust the smoothness level of the creased edges, we can use the crease level. And I think a crease level of 1 does the trick. The reason why crease level 1 is already enough is because our mesh was not that low on geometry. The lower you go, the higher your crease level probably has to be when you later subdivide. And now we can come in and basically have fun with our shape. So what I'm going to do now is use the mesh/brush and just give a separation along this edge right here. And what you can do here, what I forgot to do, is use layers, so you can later go back and forth. If you want to redo your details, you can do that at any time. So what you could do for each step, you could use a new layer. So whenever you put your panel cuts in, a new layer, basically every step you're not unsure of if you want to keep it or not, you can use a new layer. So now I'm coming back to the strip that I saved before, and I can give that dynamic thickness, and that will wrap perfectly around the mesh. So now we have a lot of freedom. Instead of having it extruded from the original mesh, we can give this a separate color, a separate material, move it into place, and just have more freedom to change it whenever we want. The only downside to that method is that when you move the entire piece, that you will always have to select both. So now I'm applying the thickness, and I want to isolate the out-facing face. So now once I've got that established, I can use the move brush and give thickness to this border wherever I want. So basically I do it the opposite way that Marco Pliff does it. He gives everything thickness at once, and then he uses the morph brush to kind of get rid of the thickness where he doesn't want it. So you can use either way. I kind of prefer to do it manually, like so. Alright, I think this is looking good. And now we can move forward to continue enhancing the secondary shapes. So for once I'm going to use my masking brush. And I'm just trying to follow the shape within the shape. Kind of stay parallel to the already established edges. So the first method that I was using to establish my secondary shapes was to create those plane changes and use edges and panel cuts to manifest those secondary shapes. And now what I'm doing is painting additional shapes within those shapes to create more subtle plane changes within those secondary shapes. And to make these masking islands a bit more crisp and round, I use apply round corners to mask, which you can find in the default macros in the macro tab. So I'm now inverting this mask and use the gizmo, and while holding down Alt, I move it alongside the edge, so my gizmo will be parallel to the edge I want to rotate the face inwards to. And then in addition to that, I will turn on local symmetry, so now I can scale in those surfaces. Basically, that will give the effect that they are more visible from the front. And they're not in a 90-degree angle, so to say. Now I'm trying to give this border a bit more interest, give it a nice ridge with one of the brushes from Mike Nash. And use the move brush with backface masking on to give it a bit more thickness and a bit more rigidity, and also use the MAH cut brush to define this edge a bit more. Speeding up portions of the video here because it took me quite some time, and it's just the same steps over and over again, just moving things into place. And now I'm masking in another portion which I thought could look nice. Could be a nice repetition to the previous shape. Again, trying to stay parallel to the already established edges, and then apply round corners to mask again. Maybe I could use a bit more resolution here, but I think that's alright. Always depends on how close you want to show your model at the end. And then you can also still come in and use the MAH cut brush to refine those edges and make them more clean. Lots of ways to repair your meshes, make it look nicer. And so with this method, we have already been able to make this shape very interesting without even going into the details. And so I'm now using another method that I saw from Marco Plouffe, is giving portions of the panel cuts additional thickness to make them a bit more interesting. I think that definitely is a really nice effect you can give to your panel cuts. And now we can use the alpha brush and put in some details. But don't overdo it, just use a few here and there. It's always a good idea to group your details, keep them in one place, and don't put them everywhere. So later on you will still have portions of your plates that have nice open areas where the eye can rest. This is another cool brush I got from Marque Bleuf, which is a default brush, which is the trim front, to create these nice cutouts. You could potentially put bolts in them or whatnot. Really nice to put in where those plane changes are. And yeah, that is basically it. I think this is a fantastic method to use whenever you want to create a game asset or something for 3D printing, or just to refine your concept meshes, because it's a really easy to follow step-by-step guide that you can use to give a very high quality to your mesh, but also give you the possibility to give a very similar look to the entire model. Alright, I hope this was helpful, and I see you in the next one.